word tariff is my favorite word in the dictionary.
Markets lost $6 trillion the week the tariffs were announced. The dollar fell. JP Morgan economists say the Trump administration's tariffs, if sustained, would be the biggest tax increase since 1968, with the recession risks now above 60%.
It's a pretty high chance. It has been some time since this has occurred, so the market has come back a bit, but it still hasn't, as of this point, actually gone back all the way to all-time highs or even the level it was prior to these tariff calls. So things are still up for debate on what's going to be happening next.
We forecast recession. We're not by any means saying that's the only thing that could happen here. I think we have an economy that is still on solid ground. It's getting hit by big shocks. What we got this week was a very big tax increase on U.S. businesses and households. We would scale it in terms of a roughly 20% rise in tariff rates to basically the highest tax increase we've had in the U.S., if it's going to be fully delivered, that we've had since 1968.
This is the biggest policy mistake in 95 years. It's a self-inflicted wound. Unforced error, did not have to happen.
Some economists worry that
that guy is definitely unbiased. He's just stating the facts.
Federal Reserve cannot easily offset the damage due to elevated inflation and credibility concerns.
The embers of inflation are still smoldering. We are in a different context than we were, and the Fed has evoked several times the cautionary tale of the 1970s.
I don't know why Trump didn't learn the lesson of the Smoot-Hawley tariff, because I know the Fed learned the lesson of its mistakes in 1930, 31, and 32. That's one reason why the great financial crisis did not turn into a Great Depression.
The Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930 raised U.S. import duties to record levels. It triggered global retaliation and may have deepened the Great Depression. Here's how long the tariffs might last, and whether the U.S. is heading toward a recession. The president has broad executive authority over tariffs, allowing him to raise, lower, or remove them at will. This flexibility has fueled speculation about President Trump's endgame, with some viewing the tariffs as a tactical opening move designed to create leverage in future negotiations.
I would assume that this will not be in place in a month, 2 months, definitely not in the back half of the year. So I'm in the camp that this is the beginning of a big negotiation. We're going to be hearing about tariffs for quite a while now. And the president has set the stage for what he loves to do. He'll be negotiating every single day for the foreseeable future with each one of these countries.
Donald Trump has a lot of motivations. Many of those motivations contradict each other. The number one motivation is that the United States runs a trade deficit, that we buy more from the rest of the world than we sell more to the rest of the world. I think that's largely a function of American strength. I don't think these tariffs are going to help. And so in that sense, we're still going to have a trade deficit 6 months from now. We're still going to have one 3 years from now. I think some of these go away because they're just so crazy. But I don't think the 10% is going away. We have just so much uncertainty now. Record amounts. How much does this matter? How do these tariffs get resolved? I think they're just so crazy that we're not going to have them 2 months from now. On the other hand, I didn't think we'd have them now, so who knows?
There's also a question of how much pain in the stock market the White House is willing to tolerate.
It's essentially an economic Armageddon. If these tariffs stayed in place, this is as nervous as I've seen investors going back to COVID March 2020. You have to assume that these tariffs don't hold in their current form. If they hold in their current form, then essentially you have 15 to 20% demand destruction across the board in terms of costs that are actually going to have to come through.
The most important thing is for countries to come to us not offering zero tariffs, which is disingenuous because it won't get us anything. What they have to do is tell us they're going to drop all their non-tariff cheating. That takes a little time here, okay? We got a $1.2 trillion deficit. I expect the market to quickly find a bottom.
They've made a conclusion that the market is efficient. Hopefully this will be a negotiation of let's get to the table, let's negotiate fair deals. The tariffs were the only thing that got China to the table to negotiate. And there's no question that China's market has been closed to us for a long time, and our market's open to them. And if we could rebalance that and we could create an opportunity for U.S. companies to do business in China with a growing middle class, that's a big opportunity.
In response to a request for comment, the White House pointed CNBC to President Trump's statements to the press on April 7th.
There can be permanent tariffs, and there can also be negotiations, because there are things that we need beyond tariffs. Tariffs are very important, but there are a lot of things like opening up countries that were totally closed. China is essentially a closed country. In fact, it is a closed country. So we're going to get fair deals and good deals with every country, and if we don't, we're going to have nothing to do with them.
Yeah, I do think he is trying to set up some negotiations that he's going to follow through with for quite some time. We still haven't kind of gotten to the bottom of this. As some of those people speculated, we could be dealing with this for 2-3 years, maybe 4 years, the full time. And so we'll see how it works out. I think he does seem very set on these tariff wars that he's currently going through. But again, he might be starting high. I think this is classic negotiation, is you always start high and then you work your way down. And so if you open up at saying, well, have 5% tariffs, it's going to be hard to negotiate up to 10 or 15%. But if you start at something crazy like 50% or 75%, it's going to be much easier to get to, 20-25% by the end of it. So this might be the tactic that he has. We haven't really seen a conclusion to many of these tariff discussions. So it's still unclear exactly where his mind is at and exactly what outcome he's pushing for right now.
Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick told Face the Nation that the White House is not wavering.
There's no postponing. They are definitely going to stay in place for days and weeks. That is sort of obvious. The president needs to reset global trade. Everybody has a trade surplus, and we have a trade deficit. We are paying away our future and our lives. The countries of the world are ripping us off, and it's got to end. The president has made it crystal clear.
People thought that while this administration would move in extreme ways, it still had a commitment to supporting the business sector and the expansion. I think that's being challenged.
The tariffs put Congress in a difficult political and fiscal position, especially if the economy and markets continue to take a hit.
The president will get $600 billion of revenue from these tariff increases. That gives Congress more resources to say, what can we do? Because extending the existing tax cuts is no longer an option. You're going to need to see lower marginal tax rates, lower corporate tax rates, and more incentives to invest to ease that pain and to push off a possible and growing likelihood of a recession.
Republican members of Congress may be breaking from the White House. Senator Chuck Grassley introduced a bill on April 3rd that would give Congress the power to approve or roll back tariffs. He was joined by at least 3 other Republican senators.
What I expect, for every action, there's a reaction. A more pro-growth and a faster tax bill, possibly the Fed being forced to cut rates, and you could see some global policy changing as countries realize that they're going to have to do something for themselves.
Something slightly tangential to what he's saying right now, but it was somewhat covered in that back and forth, where I think another interesting thing about what's happening right now is Trump is effectively trying to poke around and see where the line is on his power and authority and what he can and cannot do. And I think many people are arguing that he's overstepping in some cases. But I think one of the advantages of him doing this is that these lines that were seemingly vague before, because he has been taking some of these actions, he has been getting away with it for some time, and then they're rolling some of it back, is that these lines will become more solidified and checks and balances will likely be put in place throughout his tenure to offset any changes that he's making or be prepared for these types of changes and actions in the future. So this is something that I think is useful as a government, broadly speaking, because some of these things might just be clauses and policies that exist out in the world, and they just assume people don't use the power in these various ways. But obviously Trump is trying to use whatever power and means he has available to him. And so I think this is also going to be a very informative time for the other branches of government and how actions can be taken and what measures need to be put in place if they do disagree or think that that's not fundamentally what should be happening. And so these are things that I think will be ironed out during his tenure.
Now that Trump has this onerous policy on them.
Many major economists now forecast a mild recession in the U.S. if the tariffs stay in place.
We actually now have a recession with stagflation, and that's what the Federal Reserve, a mild recession with stagflation, and this is a high watermark in employment. We've seen WARN notices pick up. We think there will be some employment losses due to the tariffs as well. And so we're looking at, retaliatory environment, how much retaliation you put in. If you take all of the tariffs at face value, because they layer on top of each other, and many people are not really looking at how these do that, if they were to sustain, they would be the highest since the early 1900s.
Something that she might be referencing is how there's tariffs on particular types of goods as well as countries. So for instance, there's tariffs on like particular materials like aluminum or other materials, and then there's also tariffs on particular countries. So I think this is what she's referencing here, where there's kind of compounding tariffs, and there might even be tariffs for particular categories, maybe for like automotive or other types of electronics. So this is where if you end up in a category where you have an automotive vehicle that is made out of particular materials from another country, there could be a lot more tariffs associated with those than others. And I believe that's what she's referencing on this sort of compounding effect.
Which is really sort of stunning to think about that. And we agree wholeheartedly with this being a very large tax increase on the U.S. economy.
Where things are going to matter right now is to what degree does consumer purchasing power get squeezed by higher inflation? And to what degree does a consumer which still has the wherewithal to cushion the blow and has consistently been cushioning the blow of higher inflation in periods of temporary softening in labor demand over the last 10 years, whether it will continue to do so? We're concerned that that's going to be harder to do in a world in which inflation is high, business sentiment is weakening, and the labor market is softening. But it's by no means clear, by any means 100%, what's going to happen here.
The shock of this sort of suddenly, with no pre-negotiations, no congressional input, and that uncertainty, I think, will reverberate for a number of years.
Yeah, something that they're trying to discuss right now is the chances of recession. So this one is interesting, broadly speaking. So if you take a step back, some of our largest recessions had to do with massive issues that existed in various systems or much larger macroeconomic scenarios. So COVID, there was arguably some recession there that was happening during those times. And that was obviously because there was a pandemic. Basically, a lot of things weren't functioning. They were supposed to function. There's like the 2008 where there was issues with like the subprime mortgage loans. Then there was around 2000 with the dot-com bubble. And so we've had a number of these, and usually they are marked by a pretty serious issue that spans a number of areas. And so usually these don't just happen with no rhyme or reason behind them. Usually there's something that's culminating into it or some huge, massive adjustment that's occurring. And so these tariffs could be one of those changes where, especially because likely I would say Trump's tariffs, even if they went in as is, if those are the only changes that happen globally, it probably isn't going to be that large of a shift to cause a global recession of any sort. However, this is creating these trade wars where once he adds a tariff to one country, they reciprocate and increase their tariffs. And so this is a situation where it's not entirely clear on where the cascading events will occur. And obviously, we've seen the market go down quite a bit. And as they've mentioned with tariffs themselves, they would increase the price of goods, which could increase inflation, also could cause some businesses to go out of business. For example, if you're exporting things right now and these countries are having reciprocal tariffs, then your business might not be doing as well in this current scenario, even though the outward goal of tariffs is to promote more manufacturing, et cetera, within the country. That would still likely take some time, but the impact to folks who are exporting is probably going to be near instant once they take effect. And so those things culminating could, but it depends on the varying degrees at which it happens. If Trump continues to negotiate these numbers down into more realistic and palatable numbers, then it likely wouldn't. There might be some more market corrections that occur to kind of price in some of these tariffs and how that would adjust consumer demand and the pricing of those goods and potentially profit margins. But it could also escalate to the point where if he holds strong on some of these higher tariff numbers and other countries do the same, this could cascade into much higher amounts of goods for consumers in the US and potentially globally. And then that could have a chain of events where maybe consumer demand goes down because everything's more expensive and so they're buying fewer things. And then there's less incentive for companies to hire people because they're selling less goods, so on and so forth. So this is where it is very complicated, but I don't know if anyone can say with certainty right now whether it's going to happen or not. I think there's a lot of speculation currently happening at this moment, and there's some folks, even in this segment that we saw today, of some folks are so anti-tariff that they think that it's an abomination, it's just obviously going to lead to recession, it's such a bad move. And some folks are saying, you know, actually it might make sense, we are at a deficit, let's start opening up trade with China more. And so there's certainly disparate views as of this moment, and so time will tell, and hopefully it doesn't for all of us in America and probably those abroad as well. A US recession or a global recession isn't going to really do anyone any good. So hopefully that is avoided.
Years in the economy, even if, 2 weeks from now, he removes it. Now, if he removes it, we won't have a recession. We'll have a slowdown. Long-term economic plans depending on knowing the regime you are in and the rules of the game and the tax structure you are in. When that's all thrown to uncertainty, it just throws a wet blanket over your decisions.
Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed what you've seen, please hit like or subscribe. I will see you around.